Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to ask the question, is China dumping on the world? Because despite the tariffs that have been applied on all Chinese exports into the USA, its single biggest market, China is actually exporting more products today than it ever has done before. As you can see from this graph, the amount that China is exporting is now up above $3.5 trillion. And one of the biggest items that it's exporting is electric vehicles. You can see the growth over the past 8 years in the volume of exports coming out of China of electric vehicles, and they continue to rise. And the monthly exports are now up around $2.5 billion. That is a huge volume of cars. Now, obviously, not many of these exports are going to the USA, but lots of other countries around the world are taking them. And the question is this China dumping these products, or is it just because China is so much more efficient and can produce things at such a low value that everybody wants to buy them? Now, before we get into the details on all of this, I'd firstly like to ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button, because I live on these subscriptions. It helps me with the algorithm, just makes me feel a bit happier. And also, if you'd like to win this original Joe Blog sculpture called Cheerful Square, which is created by a really famous Armenian artist, then have a look in the link below, because I'm running a competition, but you have to be quick because it ends on the 30th of September. Now, the reason why I'm raising this question as to whether or not China is dumping products is because there has been a large increase in the number of trade remedy cases filed against Chinese goods. You can see from this chart, which dates back to 1995, the volume of trade remedy cases filed against China. And trade remedy cases are basically a situation where a country accuses China of selling goods into its market either below the normal price or below cost price if it believes that Chinese companies are being subsidized or basically are just looking to dump their products at a low price in order to flood the market. And if you have a look at what happened in 2024, you can see that there was a surge in the number of cases raised against China. And the black section on this chart shows those cases filed up until August of each year. And the reason why it's August is because we've now got the data through to August 2025. And you can see the volume of cases that have been lodged in 2025 are also high, the highest apart from 2024 since 2020. So we've got an increase in the number of countries accusing China of dumping. And the products that they're accusing them of predominantly are listed here. So electric vehicles, we just saw the chart a moment ago. There has been a huge surge in the production of electric vehicles in China. There are over 150 different brands producing electric vehicles in China. And when you think about the vehicle market globally, I think you'd struggle to name 30 brands globally. So 150 brands just for electric vehicles in China shows how the industry has really exploded. And there's actually been a number of anti-subsidy probes that have been launched. The EU, the USA, India, and Brazil have all undertaken investigations, and they are all now applying large tariffs against the import of those vehicles to try to put it onto a level playing field, because what the countries are concerned about is that if China is allowed to get away with selling large volumes of electric vehicles in the market at very low prices, it could put all of the local manufacturers out of business because people buy the cheapest products. And then at some point, if all of those other companies have disappeared, then China would have a global monopoly and then could start hiking prices again, really just sort of take them up through the roof. The other markets where China's been accused of dumping, solar panels, they've got a huge oversupply in China, and actually they're providing around 80% of all solar panels globally now, so they really do have already almost a monopolistic position. Steel and aluminium, they've been accused of dumping this at low prices overseas to, again, drive out the competition. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that within the last year or so, the UK government had to step in and actually save British Steel, which was the last producer of virgin steel in the UK. And the reason why it was stepping in was because it wasn't making any money. It was actually owned by a Chinese entity that was due to close it down. And that would have meant that Britain wouldn't then been able to produce its own virgin steel, which is important for sectors like the defence sector, where you need to have really high performance steel in certain components. Batteries linked to electric vehicles, EV and storage, is another area where China has been accused of flooding the markets, and the EU, the US, and Canada have filed cases against it. Chemicals and fertilizers, India and the European Union have launched cases against China selling those products into their markets at low values. Consumer goods such as textiles, toys, and appliances, South Africa, Pakistan, and Brazil have filed cases against China. And electronics, including phones, semiconductors, and components, we've got the USA, Japan, and South Korea all undertaking probes. So these are the main areas that China have been accused of dumping, but actually there's lots of others. I just didn't have time to go through them all. So in terms of how China is performing at the moment, we talked earlier in the video about the fact that Donald Trump has been targeting China with his tariffs. And those tariffs at one point were up to 145%. They're now down to around 30%. However, there's still ongoing discussions. And that has been the biggest single market. So you would have thought that China would be suffering right now in terms of its exports. But as you can see from these two charts, China's ports are actually busier than ever. We've got three different lines here showing 2023 in black, 2024 in pink, and 2025 in grey. So if we look at volume of containers being processed at Chinese ports, you can see the grey line is the highest out of all of the three. So it's record-breaking levels of containers being processed for the last 3 years. And it's the same with international cargo flights, which is the alternative way of shipping Chinese products if they're high value and they don't weigh very much. So things are going well at the ports. And if we look at Shanghai, which is the largest single port in China, you can see from this graph, which dates back to 2007, that the current volume of containers is at a record level, 5.5 million containers per month. So things are going well in terms of exporting. And one of the benefits that China has managed to get from that is that the use of the Chinese yuan is now rising. This chart shows the volume of settlements of trade goods dating back to 2019. And you can see that we've got almost a continuous improvement here. And back in 2019, the settlements were down at around 15%. Today, they're above 30%. So it's more than doubled in 6 years. So all of this looks like good news from China's point of view. Now, in terms of where are these exports going to, this chart shows the different markets dating back to August 24, so over the last 12 months. And we've got four different lines here. Africa is shown in black, the USA in pink, the European Union blue, Asian countries in yellow, and Latin America in green. And this is the year-on-year change. So this isn't the actual size of the market. This is just showing how much things have changed in the last 12 months. And you can see that the biggest single change, the biggest market in terms of growth, is Africa, which has seen growth of more than 30%. That's pretty substantial. And interestingly, a lot of that has come since Donald Trump took over as the president in January, and the tariffs have been applied against Chinese imports into the USA. So China has been looking for somewhere to redirect a lot of those exports to. The second biggest growth has been in Asia, which has come in at around about 15%, followed by the European Union and Latin America. And then the pink line below the zero line shows that the volume of exports to the USA has been falling. So China has managed to offset that fall in US exports by selling into all of these other continents. And if we look at the breakdown as to where the biggest markets are, just as a comparison, so far this year, the exports to the USA have been around about $220 billion. So you can see that the biggest market from China's point of view is now Asia, with over $640 billion worth of exports in 2025. The next biggest market is the European Union with $542 billion, followed by North Asia, then Latin America at $287. The USA would then come in at number 5 on this list, followed by Africa at $206 and India at $130. But if you look at the shape of all of these charts, you can see that we've got rapid growth in all of these markets. So, coming back to the question that I posed at the beginning of today's video, is China dumping its products into all of these markets at low prices, possibly lower than cost, just to keep the exports flowing? Well, we talked about the level of trade remedy cases that have been brought against China, and I thought it was worth going into what a trade remedy case actually is. And there's three different types of trade remedies. The first is an anti-dumping case, where a foreign company is selling a product at a lower price than it charges at home or even below its cost level. So Chinese companies are being accused of doing this. And one of the reasons for that is because they are selling at such a low price. And the question is that because China is able to produce items at such a low price because they've got economies of scale, low labor and efficiencies, or is this a deliberate strategy by Chinese companies to place those products at a very low price to drive out all of the competition? The second type of case is a countervailing duty case, where a foreign producer benefits from government subsidies. So this might be in the form of cheap loans or tax breaks, energy discounts, or sometimes even just a grant of cash to help set up a facility. And Chinese companies have been accused of this, particularly in the electric vehicle market, where the European Union and the USA have undertaken investigations, and they have said that the Chinese government is helping these companies to be able to produce vehicles at very low values by giving them free rent and lots of free energy, those sort of things, so that they can produce at a very low price, which potentially then forces out all the overseas competition. And then the third type of case that can be brought under a trade remedy is a safeguard case, where a sudden surge of imports, even if they're fairly priced, causes or threatens serious injury to domestic producers. So I think this is along the lines of what Donald Trump has been doing, that he's wanting to protect US industry. And so even if China isn't dumping, even if it's able to produce at very low prices, he doesn't want those Chinese products coming into the US market and driving out all of the US companies. He wants to protect US business and try to develop it and bring more jobs into the USA. So they're the three types of cases that can be brought in terms of trade remedies. In terms of answering the question as to whether or not China is dumping, we have to look at how this comes about. So one of the issues is overcapacity. So China currently has massive excess capacity in several industries: steel, aluminium, solar panels, batteries, and electric vehicles. And what that means is that China, the way that these industries have been set up, doesn't have sufficient domestic demand to be able to buy all of those goods. They've been set up to feed the export markets. That's why China has built these mega factories, so that it can export things like electric vehicles and solar panels all around the world. So it's got this huge overcapacity and weak domestic demand. And the question is it just selling into the rest of the world because it's producing too much for its home market? Or is it overproducing deliberately and also selling at a price that would be lower than they would normally price at? That's one of the questions to be answered. And I think from my point of view, I think China obviously is a manufacturer. It's a global entity. It builds to sell overseas. So that's the reason why these companies have been set up. But are they selling for less than their actual production price? Well, I think there is a real chance that they might be. In terms of subsidies, well, Chinese companies definitely receive state support. Many Chinese businesses are actually part state-owned because of the way the country is structured. So that would sort of be like an owner of a company putting money into the business. But the problem that throws up is that they then can produce things at very low cost. And so other countries could accuse it of actually subsidizing that business deliberately to drive down the price, and that can be seen as unfair competition. Now, in terms of the evidence from the trade data, Chinese exports of EVs, solar panels, and batteries surged by double digits to most of its markets in 2025. Investigations have been launched into sectors such as electric vehicles, and the European Union concluded that China was providing substantial government subsidies to the EV market, and therefore it applied tariffs against those vehicles. And the USA and India have also raised tariffs, explicitly accusing China of dumping steel, aluminium, and green technology. And we've also got other countries such as Brazil and Turkey who filed anti-dumping cases against China over the past 12 months. Now, in terms of China's response to these accusations, it denies any dumping and says that the prices reflect efficiency, scale, and cost advantages and are not due to unfair practices. And they claim that tariffs are protectionist tools to shield weaker Western industries from Chinese business. And they're retaliating at the moment by launching their own anti-dumping investigations into things such as brandy, pork, and dairy produced in the European Union. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think the question as to whether or not China has been dumping goods into the world economy is one that's been on the table for quite some time. However, what we've seen in today's video is that the response to the tariffs that have been applied against Chinese imports into the USA, which historically has been the biggest single market, it's the biggest economy in the world, the USA, so it's the most attractive from China's point of view. The response to that has been a surge in exports all around the world. We have seen a huge rise in the volume of transactions with all of the other countries. And the question is that just because China is now focusing on those countries rather than the USA, or is it because it's selling cheap products into all of those countries to try to offset the loss of purchasing from the USA? And what we've looked at in today's video is the sectors that China is being accused of dumping with. So they include electric vehicles, electric vehicle battery manufacturing, steel, aluminium, and solar panels. And certainly within all of those sectors, China is a major player. It's able to produce things at a very low cost, and it's selling them all around the world. Now, other countries have accused China of firstly subsidizing those industries. So the Chinese state is allowing those industries to have tax breaks and grants and free rent and things like that to reduce their costs so that they can produce at a very low value. And also, they're accused of slashing their prices and just selling at a very low rate in order to put all of the competition out of business. And as a result of those accusations and investigations, countries such as the USA, the European Union, India, and Brazil have applied tariffs directly against Chinese imports to increase the price and make it more of a level playing field for the home competition. Now, China denies all of these accusations and says that it's down to cost advantages, efficiencies, and scale. They're able to produce things much cheaper than the rest of the world because they're better at doing so. Now, whether or not you buy that side of the argument or the side of the argument from the rest of the world who are saying that these are unfair practices, I guess depends on your viewpoint. But when you look at the evidence, the prices are certainly cheaper coming out of China. There's no question about that. Is it because they've got better efficiencies and economies of scale? Well, they certainly do have economies of scale. They have these mega factories that are absolutely huge. And also, they have very cheap labor in China. So they are able to produce things at lower cost than other countries. So there is an argument to say that maybe China just does things better than the rest of the world. It's able to produce things at a lower price. However, if you buy into the argument put forward by Donald Trump that it doesn't really matter whether or not China is producing things at a lower price, he doesn't want those things in the US market, and so will apply tariffs against Chinese imports to make it more of a level playing field, then it doesn't really matter whether you agree that China is more efficient than the rest of the world. It's just bringing things to a level playing field in terms of price. So I think the overall summary of today's question of whether or not China is dumping product into the rest of the world, well, it certainly is. It's producing huge volumes, much more than can be purchased in China. It's making things to sell them all around the world. Those things are being sold at very low prices, usually lower than any of the local competition can produce. And so China is dumping that product around the world. The question as to whether or not they're doing that fairly or unfairly, I'll leave you to make your own decision on. So thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. Hopefully you've enjoyed it and found it useful, informative, and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up and please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, if you'd like to win this statue, then please have a look in the link below where you can find that competition. and I'll see you again on the next video. Thank you so much to everyone that's supporting me. If you bought me a coffee, sent me a YouTube super thanks, or signed up as a member, a Patreon, or a Buy Me Coffee member, thank you for that support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.